Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Norman Blumenthal. I'm Norman Blumenthal, who's a director. I'm the director of Trauma, Bereavement, Crisis Intervention for all Children, Home, and Family Services. This is a presentation for direct service providers, including nurses, clinical staff, and managers. Let me begin by hoping that everybody is well, and that all your loved ones are well, and if anyone is sick in any fashion, that they're recovering in as expedient fashion as possible. We're going to talk today. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, maybe 20, 30 minutes about coping with the current crisis and juggling your professional responsibilities along with your personal needs. It's impossible to anticipate everybody's potential issues and concerns, so I'll try to keep it as universal as possible, but then we will have time afterwards for people to raise questions or issues that I may have not discussed. I also want to remind your own professional staff that the trauma team has a designated email for those who want an individual appointment with members of the trauma team. The email is coping with COVID-19 at olfamily.org. That's coping with COVID-19 at olfamily.org. As I kind of indicated already, when it comes to coping with anything, or when it comes to stress reactions, there's not one size that fits all. Everybody has unique coping mechanisms, and of course, the more extreme the situation, the more people are going to rely on what works for them. So it's just to give an example, if let's say you were a carpenter and you were building a tool shed, you could experiment with unique types of different material or different ways of building the tool shed. But if you're building a bedroom or extension on your house, you're going to use what's worked for you in the past because you're not going to take chances. In the other case, the worst thing that can happen is your tools get wet, but you're not going to fool around when you're building onto your house. And the same thing is true of us. When we're coping with a minor matter, we can try different ways of coping. But when we're dealing with an extreme circumstances such as these, we're going to use what's the proven and tried methods in which we cope. So everybody's going to do it their own way. Listen to some of the suggestions, listen to what other people have to say, and see what resonates with you and what seems to work. First of all, a very important part of this work, and especially for those of you, and again, I'm presenting this with so undying respect for everything that you're doing, and you are really the backbone of OHIL and any organization that provides services to the needy. You're on the front lines, and we'd say this with the utmost respect. But it is important that you're in touch with others. You're in touch with others for several reasons. First of all, to varying degrees, we are cut off from others, and therefore the human contact is a very basic and essential need. But even if you, because of the nature of your work, you are interacting and you are around people, perhaps more than many other people are, it's important to talk to others and talk to others who are in a similar situation. This accomplishes several things. First of all, you can share ways in which you're coping and you're managing, but also it helps you feel like you're part of something bigger. And it's not just you facing this tidal wave of illness and fear, etc. You're doing it with others, and that's extremely important. Let me share with you two very interesting psychological studies that really speak to this. One of them was a study which was done in which they had the subject of the study cross a bridge, and then they had a research assistant from the people doing the study cross the bridge from the other end and meet the midway. So the subject of the study is crossing from one end, and the person from the study is walking the other end, and they meet each other midway in the bridge. And afterwards, the subject was asked to assess how attractive the other person was. And there were two different situations. In one situation, the bridge was steady. In the other situation, the bridge was rocky and shaky. And pretty consistently, the people who were on the shaky bridge rated the person they were meeting midpoint as more attractive than they did when they were on the steady bridge. And the rationale, the understanding is that when you feel you're in a treacherous situation, you seek out others. You want to have contact with others, and therefore you're more sort of drawn to the other person who is there. The other study, which is a very famous one and one that you probably know about was a study in which they took college freshmen. They gave them a very heavy backpack, and they took them to a fairly steep hill. And they told them they wanted to climb that hill with this heavy backpack. The only difference was that but before, I'm sorry, but before they climbed the hill, they had to estimate how hard it would be to climb the hill. The only difference was that in one group climbed the hill alone, and the other one climbed the hill with a friend. And again, pretty consistently, the people who were climbing the hill with a friend estimated the hill as easier than those who were climbing the hill alone. So when you feel you're part of something and when you're sharing your experience with others, and especially when you're in a special undertaking and you're doing it together, it just makes it seem less big and less treacherous. So again, I'm really encouraging people to be in touch, and we can connect remotely very effectively nowadays. That's perhaps the cure before the illness, that we have the technology and ways to connect like we are now. So therefore, I would urge you to be in touch with others and share and discuss and talk about experience. Certainly those whose experiences overlap with yours, either because of similar work or maybe working in the same setting. Don't be afraid of your humanity. Don't be afraid that you could be weak and vulnerable. Don't be afraid that you're scared or you're overwhelmed. That doesn't make you a weak person. We have this nutty thing that if you do something without any expression of vulnerability, without any fears, then you're courageous. And that's not the case. Actually, true courage is facing how frightened you are, facing how distressing these times are, and doing it anyway. And so it's perfectly okay when you have contact with others is to admit to how difficult this is and how taxing this time period is, and nevertheless doing your job and doing your job effectively nonetheless. My father, may rest in peace, who was a decorated World War II veteran, used to tell me that during battle, especially something like the Battle of the Bulge, where 1 out of 3 Americans were killed, the line among the soldiers was that I'm the first to be afraid and the last to run. And that's what we have. It's perfectly okay to be afraid, but we're obviously the last ones to run. Also, take pride in what you're doing. It's not arrogance, especially now when it's more trying and difficult, and when the whole world is stressed. It's okay and to actively express it, to say how privileged you feel. You're helping more vulnerable populations. You're helping people who otherwise are less equipped to help themselves. And this is very noble work. And in your conversations with others, or even in your conversations with family members or yourself, acknowledge it, because that will also attach more importance to what you're doing and make some of the difficulties less challenging. In general, I would encourage you to put off stressors or undertakings that are not time pressing. We are in a crisis mode right now, and there might be some personal issues. There might be some stresses in your life that are not directly related and that don't have to be immediately addressed. And while we're being challenged so much by the circumstances, it's okay to put them off. So really focus your attention and focus your, if you will, your mental and physical energy on what needs to be done now, and not that which can be postponed. It's perfectly okay. Also realize that any kind of issues you may have, any malcontent, any area of friction that might exist either in your home or on the work setting, and there often is. It's not everything is always so perfect, but any kind of distress is going to be amplified by what's going on now. So if there is let's say, a tense relationship existing between you and a coworker, or if there is some frustration in circumstances in your home with a spouse, partner, or children, you're going to feel it more. The nature of stress and trauma, or the mathematics of stress and trauma, is often that 2 and 2 is not 4. 2 plus 2 equals 8, and 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 38. So stress upon stress hurts all the more. There's the expression of standing on your ingrown toenail. That's sort of what this is like. So be aware that any matters that might bother you somewhat, but not all that much, could get blown up, or could be, as I said, could be amplified by the communal stresses that we're feeling right now. And it might require you to sort of remind yourself that this is a matter, again, maybe it doesn't have to be solved right now, maybe it can be addressed later when it doesn't loom so large in front of you. It's very important to get priorities straight, and the priorities can take many different forms. Priorities can be, how much am I taking care of family members? How much am I addressing work? How much am I attending to friends? How much am I attending to elderly parents? There are many, we are very often pulled in many different directions. And again, in these more trying times, we have to sort of analyze our priorities and recognize what matters have more importance to others, how much of ourselves we can portion to these different demands, or for that matter, how much we can delegate, which is also important under these circumstances. Self-care is extremely important. And self-care means some very basic stuff that we would take for granted, making sure that you eat right, that you're not becoming, a junk food addict by just grabbing a candy bar instead of a regular lunch, making sure that you have your regular routine of sleep. As much as possible, again, we're not going to gyms and we're not playing ball nowadays, but do what is necessary to maintain one's physical shape, or one's exercise, etc. And there are things we can do. We can take walks, you can do yoga, you can do some basic exercise routines indoors. These are all forms of stress inoculation, and the healthier we feel physically, the better we're gonna manage psychologically. As much as you can, preserve your routine. The routine is extremely important for many respects. First of all, it keeps us productive. In other words, getting up when you get up, taking the breaks that you need, taking your lunch break when you're supposed to take your lunch break, eating when you're supposed to eat, eating at the regular intervals. For those who may be engaging in prayers, obviously not praying communally now, but schedule your prayer times as they had been previously. The routine not only, again, keeps us productive, but the routine sort of says to our psyche that life's going on, and that normalcy is going to return. So it is a useful way, and it's hard because sometimes when our natural structure is somehow changed, then we can sort of get into either get lazy or sort of disoriented in terms of our time. So it's important to preserve routine. And if you're on if it's a particular day that you're not going to work, but you would otherwise, then get dressed and keep your schedule as much as you can. Be very careful about how you access information and how much information you're accessing, or news or information, and from what sources. The way we learn about what's going on in the world today is very different than it had been in the recent past. Before the advent of the internet and social media, there weren't so many sources, and there wasn't so much competition for your attention. Because that has changed, we have many media that are vying for your attention, which results in a plethora of information being literally bombarded, especially if you're on your phone, mobile phone, or if you're on the computer. And many sites admittedly have biases, and many sites are actually reporting information that it is either hasn't been verified yet, or maybe actually erroneous, and doing so in very sensationalist kind of ways. And this can exacerbate your stress and anxiety. It may pay if you find yourself constantly checking and constantly finding that your blood pressure is going up as you do, is to limit yourself to certain sites, and to sites that seem reliable, and that sites that are presenting the news in such a fashion, or the information about this current coronavirus in a fashion that you can digest it and learn learn how to process the information with the proverbial grain of salt, and to know that not everything you read is necessarily the God-given truth, and we have to become skilled in terms of managing the fashion and manner in which information is given to us. Please keep in mind that stress by nature and history is cyclical. That has several connotations. First of all, even while in the stressful situation, it waxes and it wanes. There will be parts of the days in which it will be more under more duress, and there'll be parts of the days when it's not so bad. And so while you're under the state of duress, remember that this is time limited, and when there's a lull in the stress, just keep yourself braced, because these are stressful times. But know that it's cyclical by nature. It's never just steady. And know that it's cyclical even from the broader perspective of time. That situations like this historically have had a beginning and a middle and an end. We don't know exactly the timetable. There are pundits who are guessing, and like anyone, they can be wrong. I like to quote the great philosopher and theologian Yogi Berra, who used to say prognosticating is very difficult, especially about the future. And so we don't know, but I think it's safe to say that this coronavirus and COVID-19 crisis will abate ultimately. And if it's extremely trying, it's good time sometimes to reference the fact that this is what happens. And for that matter, to reference times when you or others, either in your family or other people you know, had endured some stress, perhaps even greater stresses or threats to their well-being, and have endured and have found remarkable ways to cope and manage. And it's good to reference that, and it's good to actively seek those stories out and address them. Another very effective means of coping with stress is gratitude journals. There's a remarkable body of literature in psychology that shows that people who not only recognize that which they have to be grateful for, but actually record it and actually express it verbally, do cope with stress a lot better than people don't. In fact, people who actively express gratitude secrete more serotonin and dopamine in their central nervous system, meaning that it's actually a natural antidepressant and tranquilizer. So while we feel, again, so taxed, and while we feel so deprived of human contact and maybe even many other aspects of our lives that enhance our life, we have to be grateful for what there is. And be grateful for family, be grateful for friends, be grateful for our job, be grateful for the opportunities we have, be grateful for medicine, be grateful for the internet and for cell phones that allow us to have connections that we otherwise wouldn't. And when times when we're feeling so displaced and so out of sorts, it's good to openly express that, or maybe to counter that all too human tendency to quote unquote take things for granted. And another interesting aspect of coping is, and it's actually, we're seeing it implemented, is humor. Being able to laugh, or being able to recognize the preposterousness of what's happening now. Now, humor is a very tricky place to go. On the one hand, proper humor is seen to be a very good way of coping with trauma, with stress, even in bereavement. But humor that makes light of someone else, or makes light of a circumstance, or mocks or makes jest about something that's serious to others, or belittles others at the expense of other people, is harmful. So there's, as I said, there are some very cute videos of parents expressing their absolute exacerbation or frustration of having to engage now in homeschooling or being home, all the kind of creative and sometimes funny ways in which people are coping. And it's good. It takes away some of the pain. But the other thing about humor and jokes is that if you dissect a joke, typically a joke is you lead the person along a particular way, and then in the last minute, when you get to the punchline, you're sort of like rerouting them. And people find, we find that naturally amusing and pleasurable. And that's in a way what's going on now. Life was normal. We were all doing our thing and all had sort of anticipations and dreams and expectations of what we're going to do in springtime with the Passover holiday, our summers, and now suddenly there's a punchline. So it kind of expresses that irony of what we're going through, but also, as I said, to be able to laugh at something that is painful. Again, not at the expense of others and not making light of what's really painful for somebody else is an effective way to coping. And I think that some of those pictures and short videos that are going around that meet those criteria have been very effective for us in these difficult times. There are two more points I want to mention, and then I want to open it up for questions and discussion. One is what we often refer to as meaning making or post-traumatic growth, which is to try to mine or cull within the crisis something positive that we can come out of it. That's not to say that this is good, and not say, oh, that we're having a grand old time right now. I think that's a denial of reality. But to see if we can take from this experience something, a lasting lesson, an appreciation that will stay with us even, God willing, this will be over. It just chips away at some of the senselessness and some of the pain of what we're going through now. And again, it's a very individual thing. So you can't dictate to somebody else what they should garner, what they should gain from this, whether it's a certain appreciation, whether it's a certain understanding about humanity, a certain understanding about yourself, an appreciation maybe for community, which we're being cut off from. But if you can do that, it'll, again, lessen some of the intensity and the stress. And then I want to allude to as well the psychospiritual, which is, again, I'm relying purely on psychological sources, but there is, again, a fairly large body of literature that those who do have spiritual beliefs. And again, it's a very individual. It depends on your background and your family, etc. But those who either have spiritual beliefs or somehow are adhering to the belief that there's a greater being pulling the strings, or there is some greater good that may be hidden from us while we go through these difficult times, but there is something beyond our comprehension. And, by the way, to engage in spiritual practices of sorts, whether it's prayers or meditation or something of that sort, certainly does help people cope and help reduce stress and anxiety. I hope these ideas are helpful. Again, I have to remind you that it's a very individual process and that we are available, again, through our dedicated email address, copingwithcovid19@ovofamily.org for more individual concerns. But at this point, I would like to open it up to the audience. I think what you have to do is unmute yourself, ask the question, then please remute yourself so background noise does not interfere with the discussion if you want to pose a question to me or I guess to the group at large. Totally anonymous too if you want. Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Blumenthal,
yes,
in dealing with our clients,
yes,
should we support the idea of altruistic behavior now or self-protective behavior?
Right. So that's a very hard question to answer in generalities. And it's a judgment call that maybe need to be discussed with supervisors who are familiar with your particular situation. And I'm happy to address particular situations. We do have to strike a balance between altruism and self-protection. We have to do that all the time in all of our work. But in today's time, we're going to the self-protective piece now takes on a more feverish pitch. And we have to consider that. And it really was going to be a situation by situation matter. I will tell you, though, that I think maybe except in extreme circumstances, I think that many of the clients that you're addressing, despite disabilities, have an intuitive sense that these are different times. And I think will understand if some of the administration that you had engaged in the past cannot be comparably offered. And I would not downplay, in extreme circumstances, it really often brings out the best in people. And I would venture to guess that many of your clients who would have appreciated a certain type of contact in the past, which may now have to be curtailed or truncated, will understand that. So again, there's no absolute answer. A lot of it's going to be based on your judgment, and then also you're going to have to and to discuss with others, because that will certainly help. Okay, I'm sorry, I overlooked there's some written questions. Okay, okay, people who are looking for ways around the restrictions in terms of trying to, many who have to quarantine, some who are going to recommended quarantine, but people ways looking around the restrictions. That's obviously more of a medical professional's answer, but my understanding from my reading, from what I hear, is that the more consistent we are as a community and as a city, the sooner or the less contagious this disease will be, and the sooner we'll be able to contain it. So the restrictions that are in place are not only for our own personal safety, but for the safety of the community at large. And I think that's something, and again, all of us who are on this phone call are caring people and people who have a sense of, charitable giving. And I'm sure we can understand this. Okay, someone else? Okay, so people may feel that because you have to be at work, that you're risking your life or that you're risking your family's well-being, either by not being at home or but maybe being exposed. And again, this is part of what's happening. There are not just service providers like yourself, but there are other people who, out of necessity, have to be outside, have to for the well-being of society at large. And what we have to assure our family is that we're using every precaution imaginable. In other words, if we can't, let's say, self-quarantine, then we have to give our family members and ourselves, for that matter, that we're not being careless, we're not being sort of like dismissive about the seriousness, and we're doing our job, but we're doing our job with every precaution possible. And that's going to be, the assurance that we're minimizing any kind of risk. How do we deal with backlash from the community, blaming for not staying at home and spreading? And again, look, there's always going to be people who are going to say, do inappropriate and sometimes even cruel things. I mean, there are many examples of that as this is going on. A lot of accusatory remarks, some ethnic racist remarks. They're out there. There are people that are ill-intended. We can't escape that. That's been part of society since time immemorial. But most people, I think, are rational, and most people can understand. You're not leaving the home. You're not going to work because you want to make millions. You're going to work because there is a more vulnerable population out there who are not capable of caring for themselves, and that's a communal and societal responsibility, no different than the physicians who are going to hospitals, than the researchers who are working hours and hours to see if we can develop a cure or vaccination for this disease, for the police officers who are ensuring our safety, for the firefighters ensuring our safety, the ambulance drivers. There are many subsets of society who don't have the luxury of staying home for the greater good of our community. And I think most people will understand that. But first and foremost, you have to feel secure about that yourself. You're never going to prevail upon someone else if you're not confident yourself about what you're saying. Let me see if there are any more printed questions. Okay, so the question about online technology, and we really have to be grateful that we have it. There's so much. By the way, there's just an abundance of very imaginative and creative types of games, activities for children. I know that my grandchildren have been part of it. I've been using it. Then we do have online schooling, so we're able to take advantage of it. And I know not everybody is so technology savvy, but they're pretty. It's pretty simple. I don't think we need to be experts, but again, certainly, or OHIL has a technology department that probably can be accessed if you need some help. but many of us therapists are doing online therapy. There's classes, there's entertainment, lots out there. So we need to take advantage of it. It's very important, especially for those who are confined to the home, for children, to fill up the day and fill up the day with not only structure and activities, but also a kaleidoscope of activities. So there's variety, etc., and so that it doesn't become burdensome. We don't feel terribly confined. So let me conclude by again, on behalf of all of us, commending you. You are heroes for the work you're doing, and as I said, you are assisting those who are less able to take care of themselves, and there's no more noble job than that. And to please feel free to contact us at coping with COVID-19 at awholefamily.org if we can be of any further assistance. The and we all are in this together, and hoping and praying that we should all be well, and that those who are afflicted should have a speedy and full recovery. And I can certainly say personally, as much as I can, I'm available to all of you to be of assistance. Okay, be well, and we'll be in touch.